Welcome to Think Deeply, Speak Simply, brought to you by Prezent, a show about the art and science of communicating ideas and how business professionals can unlock their careers and achieve their full potential with great communication. And now, here are your hosts, Jay Rook and Antoine Valentone.
And with that, let's welcome Kathleen Owens to the show. Kathleen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jay. Happy to be here.
We're very excited about it. Kathleen, you're a senior executive and a board member and advisor across multiple industries, including nonprofit and for-profit. Tell us about your work that you do on the boards.
Oh, sure. Well, let's talk about two specifically. Epicor, that may sound familiar to some of your listeners. Jignasha Grooms, who's a really impressive HR leader there. She was a previous guest on the show.
Listening with Empathy was the episode. We had a blast on that.
Exactly. Yeah, now she's setting a high bar. Be concise is something I really need to work on. So
nice.
That was her advice. Epicor itself is a software company, global software company, about 4,000 people based out of Austin, Texas. And it really serves businesses who make, move, and sell the things everyone needs. So think manufacturing, distribution, retail, as well as building supply and automotive after sales. My role is as an independent director. And then that really means I'm there to support the CEO and the team and provide expertise where helpful. So the way that shows up, it really means listening closely in board meetings and asking questions. I've helped to facilitate a strategy session with the board and the leadership team, making sure we're aligned and really have a shared understanding. And I act as a sounding board, sometimes to functional leaders as he or she is working through a specific challenge.
Very cool. And tell us as well a bit about your work with Ballard Food Bank.
I'd love to. So as the name implies, Ballard Food Bank is both a food bank and a community resource hub. And they serve the northwest part of Seattle. That's where I live and where I'm coming to you from today. And the mission there is to provide food and hope to neighbors because there can be enough for everyone. And ultimately, that's about helping vulnerable people on a path to self-sufficiency. So it's a really amazing organization. I've been fortunate to be on the board there for over 6 years now. It's been a challenging and exciting time. Last month, we opened doors to an incredible new permanent physical home. The physical area actually doubles our space, which sadly during COVID is especially timely. You know, what we've seen through the hardship of the past year plus is literally double the number of people in our neighborhoods in need. And so we now serve over 7,000 households a month through a variety of programs. As I mentioned, it's a food bank. There are a number of programs to get access to nutritious food and also programs directly to help for basic needs like rent assistance or utility assistance, but also connecting people to services through the partner hub. And you know, what it means to be on the board there, the work involves everything from strategic planning. So, you know, I think it was 4 years ago, we decided, yes, in fact, we should pursue having a permanent home and raising the capital, the $14 million needed to make that happen. It involves reviewing the financials and raising awareness. But most importantly, it's really about supporting the executive director.
Well, it's a beautiful initiative and congrats again on the expansion. That's awesome that's happening. Kathleen, you talk to us a little bit about where does purpose sit at the intersection of your board pursuits for you?
Yeah, great question, Jay. Might be helpful to say, my view is that a board's role is to really look after the health of the organization for both the short term and the long term. And you really can't do that without asking the question, why does the organization exist or what's its purpose? You know, think Simon Sinek here, right? Start with why. In terms of how purpose actually shows up with Epicor and our first in-depth strategy session, we talked explicitly about Epicor's purpose, which is to be the essential partner for the world's most essential businesses. Now, you know, purpose, you can think of that as your North Star. It might look different at different times. And here we are still in the pandemic, though it's more hopeful with vaccines. For Epicor, what that meant to be that essential partner at times was as customers shifted in manufacturing, for example, to making PPE, they were there to make the changes in the software. Customers who were struggling with, gosh, how do we now quickly transition to a remote workforce? We're calling up and getting guidance. When I hear something about make, move, sell, here we are in the holiday season, I'm thinking supply chain challenges, right? Definitely. So it's very relevant to how the purpose is relevant to how that shows up and how the business is structured to support customers. I'd say as a board, it's great that we grounded ourselves in purpose. We actually spend more time looking at strategy and how the execution is going. And I think of strategy as the action plan, but all of that is really in service to the purpose. So it really is fundamental to how the board thinks and works.
And what about the way that purpose fits in with your role with the food bank?
We're at a really interesting time. It's great we've been able to secure a more stable future, as I mentioned, by having a permanent home, and that kind of checks the long-term health. But now, because of everything that's happened in these past couple of years, we're stepping back to redefine our values. And that's the first step. And, ask ourselves, look at the racial reckoning we've had. What does it mean, for example, to be an anti-racist organization? And I think particularly given the connection between racial disparities and food insecurity, it's really important and candidly very challenging to answer questions like that. So right now, purpose is absolutely central to the board pursuits here. It's what will help define ourselves and ultimately help define or reaffirm our purpose so we can meet this moment.
Inspirational. Thank you. And your LinkedIn profile describes you as a passionate believer in the power of culture building, customer-centric selling, and systems thinking to create competitive advantage. And so when we talk about culture building and customer-centric selling, it seems to me that weaving purpose into that work is essential. And I'd love to ask you, what are some of the best practices in doing so?
Mm-hmm. So I believe fundamentally that we all have this need to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. And I don't mean it has to be an altruistic cause. I mean, you want to feel like what you do every day somehow matters. And I think it's a timely question, because part of what's happening with this great resignation is that need for contribution and for meaning or purpose, candidly, it's not being met. So, there's an opportunity to connect people to purpose. And it doesn't have to be that big, why do we exist? It's help me know how this fits in. A couple things you can think about doing. One is, as you recognize the good work someone's doing, challenge yourself to think a little bit more about what that enabled for someone else or for the organization. So, for example, if someone really goes above and beyond, and I see this for all the details required in coordinating a meeting, and if it's true, you would never want to be manipulative, but you can share, your thoughtfulness and attention to detail with these board meetings really help people feel comfortable, and that creates better discussion. So thank you. Again, you're linking that action to something bigger. You mentioned culture. Part of establishing culture is what we celebrate. And it might be that big purpose, that why we're here. So recognize people who demonstrate the actions that you want to celebrate. And whether it's your purpose or it's stated values, calling that out regularly, celebrating those, shows everyone what's really important and how that comes to life.
Yeah. And then any others you want to mention?
Yeah, I think leverage teams. So people want to bring their full selves to work. And I've seen so many creative approaches within teams that can honor that. Mm-hmm. I was part of a team and everyone brought a personal goal and a professional goal. And we checked in monthly for progress. And there was one guy who he could seem a bit gruff, a bit bristly. And his personal goal was building a treehouse for his two little boys. And he shared all the details about the right kind of wood and the progress that was made. And it really built connection and support. And that's an example of connecting to something bigger. I think tactically too, the words you choose make a big difference. So a phrase like what this means, that can be really powerful. It can build understanding. There's also this concept of you phrasing. People actually hear the word you very differently than they hear someone say I. And even we can sometimes be confusing. And of course, there's a place for those, but look for opportunities to change your language and try saying you achieved this goal. You made this happen. And I'll say this takes a little practice and it can feel awkward initially, but I have found it to be pretty effective.
What a great trick.
Yeah, it's good. And by the way, I'm not making these up. These are things I've learned along the way from people who've helped me with communication and teams with communication that I found to be effective. The last thought that comes to mind is,
please,
pay attention to who gets to be the hero in your story. And I think this is especially important for leaders. And spoiler alert, it shouldn't be the leader. Your stories can shine a light on the great stuff that other people are doing. So make sure it's either the employee or an issue, or really in a commercial setting, it's the customer. The customer is the hero, the one solving problems and doing this great work. And that's helpful to remember as well.
Great answer there. Thank you, Kathleen. In your experience, what are the hallmarks of purposeful communication?
Mm-hmm. I think that depends a bit on how you define purposeful. If you think of it as the reason behind why we exist, our big purpose, I would say it establishes a worthy aspiration. It can align actions to something bigger, and it's enduring. It's not going to change in the near term. If you think of the word purposeful in terms of achieving an objective, I'd say clear, concise, and explicit about what it means.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Both yourself and our prior guest, Billy Shore, have dedicated nonprofit service to the fight against hunger. And I wanted to ask, why does this cause inspire you to action, and how does this impact how you show up as a board member?
Yeah. I think access to food is so fundamental. It's a basic right, and it's really about human dignity. And so that's compelling for me because I think it's just ridiculous. And in a world and in a city like Seattle and in neighborhoods like ours, that you have this problem, right? It's a bit of a hidden problem. 1 in 6 kids in America is hungry. And for me specifically, I'll say Ballard Food Bank, the mission so aligns with how I think. And the mission, again, is about food and hope. And I love the tangible aspect. People can say, yeah, it's complex. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be. If someone's hungry, great, let's get them food. Like, I love the tangibleness of saying, great, weekend food for kids, home delivery, come into our beautiful grocery store. Let's meet that basic need. And then hope really requires that we provide reasons for things to be different. And so with the hub and with a lot of programs, tactically helping clients connect to things that will help them towards self-sufficiency is a huge part of it. And then stepping back and saying, gosh, how do we change this in the first place, right? How do we address those underlying causes? And there is, it can, it sounds like, oh my gosh, double, which is true, but there is so much hope that I see there. Again, if we back up a little over a year ago, the pandemic, pre-vaccines, we have a huge number of volunteers that really make it all happen, over 900 a year. And a lot of them were senior citizens. When the pandemic happened, they needed to stay home for good reason. We wanted them to take care of their health and limit the risk. And all of a sudden, this whole new crop of people, a lot of young people, a lot of people who had been working in restaurants and other industries that then had bandwidth, just stepped up and met the need. And I find that hopeful, and just how our communities come together. So it's a good fit for me in terms of the tangible respecting human dignity and the let's work for change. And I think it because that aligns so well with how I think about the world and think about things, I'm passionate. And I hope that helps me show up in ways that I'm very open to being creative about how to contribute in a positive way.
Love that message about hope. Thank you. Do you notice a difference in how you communicate purpose in your for-profit board work versus your nonprofit work?
Mm-hmm. I think at the fundamental level, we all have that same need. I talked about the need to be part of something bigger. I do think in the for-profit setting, you have to be much more intentional that you don't lose sight of the purpose. Mm-hmm. And there's so many competing demands, and I see how it could get lost. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about the Epicor leadership team and the board is that we are grounded in understanding the bigger purpose. But again, I think without being intentional about it, it could get lost. And I think in nonprofits, purpose and that emotional connection is so connected to the execution that it's central to so many board discussions and less likely to kind of get lost along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. Many business leaders serve their communities through nonprofit board service. What advice do you have for first-time board members?
Sure. I'd say three things. One, make sure it's a good fit. So what problems and skill sets does the organization need that you can help with? And are you genuinely inspired by the mission? That would make it a good fit. Get curious. With any board, really the way you add value and exert influence is through asking good questions. So think about, how you can learn more and help the org along the way. And finally, be supportive. Leadership can be lonely. And I think particularly given what a lot of nonprofit leaders and folks working on the front lines have endured this heart-wrenching past couple of years, they need a lot of support. So don't forget to support the spirit too.
Love that. This is a question we ask of all of our guests on the show. Do you think great business communication is more of an art or science, and why?
I think definitely both. Science in that there's no question a systematic approach to communication that can be studied, and thank goodness it is. There's so much in brain science and the social sciences today that help us learn about what can be effective, and it's really easy to access. And it's cool thing is it's continually evolving, And it's art in terms of the creativity and the uniqueness to each individual. I think about people who I know are just fantastic storytellers. That's a craft, that's their art. And I think maybe it's the art piece that can help make great communication memorable, which is certainly a part of what would make it effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And last question, what advice would you have for aspiring business leaders who want to improve their communication?
Got two thoughts here. The first is seek to understand. So if that is your genuine intention, that will guide your questions. Depending on the context, that will shape how you listen. It will impact your relationship. So really genuinely have a desire to understand. The second one, and I have to say this because my family and my folks that have worked with me would call me out if I didn't. My favorite quote on communication is from George Bernard Shaw. And he said, the challenge with communication is the illusion that it happened. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, again, depending on your context, you could ask, hey, what did we miss as you wrap up a conversation? It could be confirming understanding. What are your biggest takeaways? Let's go around the room. It could be remembering to be explicit, what this means. So, kudos to your listeners for the effort in improving communication. In my view, it's a lifelong endeavor and it's a worthy one.
Great answer. I love that quotation. Kathleen, on behalf of myself and all of our listeners here at Think Deeply, Speak Simply, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today and providing your thoughtful responses to the questions. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Jay. Great to be here.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Think Deeply, Speak Simply. To learn more about the art and science of communicating ideas, visit our free resources at Prezent.com. That's Prezent.com.